My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope, not from nervousness, from rage. The letter inside confirmed what I'd suspected for months. My parents had spent $28,000 on my twin sister Melody's college sorority fees, spring break trips, and a new car. Meanwhile, I'd just gotten an eviction notice because I was $300 short on rent. $300. I stared at the glossy photos Melody had posted that morning, her and Mom shopping at Nordstrom, caption reading, "Mom-daughter date best day ever," with 15 heart emojis. I was eating ramen for the fourth night in a row, working 2 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, and they were shopping. That's when I heard the laughter. Through my paper-thin walls, my neighbor was on the phone loud and cheerful. "Yeah, my parents are flying in for my birthday next week. Can't wait." I pressed my palms against my eyes. My birthday had been 3 weeks ago. Not a single call, not even a text. But I knew exactly where my parents were today because Melody had posted about it. They were throwing her an early birthday dinner at that expensive steakhouse downtown, the one where entrees cost what I made in a week. I stood up so fast my chair crashed backward. On my desk sat an envelope I'd been too terrified to open for 2 days. Benjamin Ford Scholarship Committee stamped across the front in official blue ink. My entire future lived inside that envelope. If it was a rejection, I'd have to drop out, take on more debt I could never repay, watch Melody graduate debt-free while I drowned. But if it was acceptance, if I'd actually won, then in 3 weeks I'd be standing on a stage with cameras rolling and 400 people watching, and my family would be sitting in the audience completely unaware that I was about to expose every single thing they'd done to me. Subject line, Benjamin Ford Scholarship Committee, urgent. My finger hovered over it. If this was a rejection, I had nothing left. If this was acceptance, everything was about to change. I clicked. "Dear Ms. Thorne, congratulations. You have been selected as this year's Benjamin Ford Scholar." I read it 3 times. Then I smiled. Not a happy smile, a dangerous one. They had no idea what was coming. In 3 weeks at the scholarship ceremony in front of 400 people and local news cameras, my family would finally learn the truth. Every sacrifice I'd made. Every night I'd cried myself to sleep. Every time they'd chosen Melody over me. It would all come out, publicly, undeniably, and there would be nowhere for them to hide. This was it. The moment I had been building toward for 4 years. The moment they would finally understand what their favoritism had cost them. But before I tell you how I got here, how I turned years of neglect into the sweetest revenge imaginable, I need you to do something for me. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been told you weren't worth investing in, hit that like button. Subscribe because this story gets so much better. And comment below with the worst thing a family member ever said to you because trust me, I understand. I really do. Now let me take you back to where this all began. I was 10 years old the first time I truly understood that love in my family was not distributed equally. It was my birthday, mine, and Melody's because we're twins, though you'd never know it from how we were treated. The morning started with Mom bursting into our shared bedroom at 7 in the morning, singing happy birthday in that theatrical way she always did for special occasions. But she walked straight past my bed to Melody's kissing her forehead and smoothing her blonde curls. "Morning birthday, girl. I have so many surprises for you today." I sat up in my own bed only 5 feet away, waiting for my turn. Mom glanced over briefly, almost as an afterthought. "Oh, and happy birthday to you too, Camilla. Get dressed. We have a busy day." The difference in her tone was everything. Melody got warmth, excitement, love. I got a reminder to get dressed. At 10 years old, I didn't have the vocabulary to explain what that felt like. I just knew it hurt somewhere deep in my chest, a place I couldn't quite reach to soothe. Melody bounced out of bed, already chattering about what presents she hoped to get, while I slowly got dressed in last year's jeans and a hand-me-down shirt that used to be hers. She got to wear a brand-new dress Mom had bought special for the occasion. I remember running my fingers over the velvet fabric of her dress when she wasn't looking, wondering what it would feel like to be chosen first to be the one Mom sang to with real joy in her voice. The party wasn't until the afternoon, so we had the whole morning of anticipation. Mom spent it doing Melody's hair in elaborate braids woven with ribbons, taking photo after photo for her scrapbook. "Look this way, sweetheart." Perfect. You're so beautiful. Meanwhile, I sat at the kitchen table with Dad, who was reading the newspaper and occasionally mumbling responses to my attempts at conversation. Dad, do you think we could go to the park later, just you and me? Maybe Pumpkin? We'll see how the day goes. It never went that way, of course. The day always went in whatever direction Melody wanted. If she wanted to stay home and play with her new toys, that's what we'd do. If she wanted to go to the mall, that's where we'd go. My preferences, my desires, they were just background noise in the symphony of Melody's needs. By noon, our backyard had been transformed into a pink and purple wonderland. Balloons everywhere, streamers hanging from trees, a huge banner that said, "Happy Birthday, Girls," with glittery letters. At least they'd remembered I existed for the banner. A chocolate cake sat on the main table, professionally decorated with both our names and frosting. Melody's name was in larger, prettier script. Mine was squeezed in at the bottom in smaller letters, almost like an apology for its existence. The present table was already stacked high with wrapped boxes, all of them addressed to Melody. I asked Mom where my presents were. She waved a hand vaguely toward the garage. "Oh, we put yours aside, honey. We'll get to them later. Don't worry." Friends from school started arriving around 2. Well, Melody's friends mostly. I had a few friends invited, but it was clear who this party was really for. Mom introduced everyone to Melody first, gushing about how pretty she looked, how popular she was at school, how wonderful her grades were. When she got to me, it was always just, "And this is Camilla, Melody's sister." Not twin, just sister. Like I was a side character in Melody's story. The other moms oohed and awed over Melody's dress, her hair, her smile. They barely glanced at me. I learned early that invisibility was my default state. We played party games that Melody chose. Musical chairs, which she won because she always won when Mom was in charge. Pin the tail on the donkey, which she also won. I came in third in both behind even guests, and nobody seemed to notice or care. When it was time for cake, everyone sang "Happy Birthday," and Melody blew out the candles. All of them. I didn't even get to blow out one. When I asked Mom about it, she said, "Oh, sweetie, you can help blow out the candles on the other side." But there were no candles on the other side. Melody had blown them all out in one breath while everyone cheered. Then came presents. This is the part I'll never forget, the part that taught me exactly where I stood in my family hierarchy. Melody sat in the special birthday chair, a throne we'd made from regular chair, decorated with ribbons, and one by one she opened her gifts. A brand new bicycle with a basket streamers and a bell. She squealed with delight. Mom actually cried happy tears. An American Girl doll, the expensive kind I'd been asking for since the catalog arrived 3 months ago. Melody didn't even like dolls that much, but she smiled and hugged the guest who brought it. A complete art set with watercolors, oils, pastels, professional-grade supplies that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. New clothes, new books, new games. The pile of wrapping paper around her grew like a mountain range. Finally, it was my turn. Mom brought out 3 presents from the garage. Just 3. The first one I opened was a sweater, clearly from the clearance rack because the tags were still on it, and it was marked down 75%. It was also 2 sizes too big. "You'll grow into it," Mom said cheerfully, already looking away to check on Melody's next activity. The second present was a book I'd already read, one I'd borrowed from the library twice because I loved it so much. But this was a used copy. Pages yellowed and spine-cracked, probably from a thrift store. I tried to smile and say thank you, but my throat was tight with disappointment. The third present was the worst. I knew as soon as I saw the shape what it was. A bicycle. But when I tore off the wrapping paper, I saw it was Melody's old bike from 3 years ago, the one she'd gotten for her 7th birthday, and then abandoned in the garage when it became uncool. Someone had spray-painted it a hasty sky blue, but the paint was uneven, dripping in places, and patches of the original pink still showed through. One of the streamers was missing. The seat was cracked. It was obviously painfully a hand-me-down disguised as a gift. I stared at it, unable to speak. Mom beamed at me like she'd done something generous. "Melody wanted you to have her old bike since she's getting a new one. Wasn't that sweet of her?" "You should thank your sister." Melody smiled at me, that innocent smile that made everyone love her, and said, "You're welcome, Lisa. I made sure they painted it blue since that's your favorite color. But sky blue wasn't my favorite color. It was hers. No one had ever asked me what my favorite color was. If they had, I would have told them it was deep purple like lavender fields at sunset. But no one asked. No one ever asked. I thanked her anyway, my voice barely above a whisper, and tried to ignore the pitying looks from the few friends who seemed to realize how unequal this all was. One of my friends, Emma, came up to me later and whispered, "That's kind of messed up." I shrugged, already learning to pretend it didn't bother me. "It's fine. At least I got a bike." But it wasn't fine, and we both knew it. The rest of the party was torture. Melody rode her new bike in circles in the driveway, all the kids taking turns riding with her, everyone exclaiming how cool it was. My repainted bike sat against the garage wall, still wet with paint that would stick to my clothes for weeks afterward. I didn't even try to ride it. What was the point? When parents started picking up their kids, they all told Melody what a wonderful party it was. A few remembered to include me in their goodbyes. Most didn't. After everyone left, Mom and Dad took Melody out for ice cream to celebrate. Just the three of them. I wasn't invited. Dad said someone needed to stay home and help clean up. I was 10 years old, and I spent the evening of my birthday picking up wrapping paper and deflating balloons while my family celebrated without me. That night, lying in bed while Melody slept peacefully in hers, I made a decision. I wouldn't cry about this anymore. I wouldn't beg for their attention. I would just survive. I didn't know then that surviving would become my defining skill, or that this birthday was just the first of many lessons in inequality. But I learned fast. Children who aren't loved enough learn to protect themselves, to build walls, to expect nothing so they can't be disappointed. I was becoming an expert at disappointment. The pattern continued and deepened as we grew older. When Melody got sick even with something as minor as a cold, Mom transformed into Florence Nightingale. She'd take the day off work, make homemade chicken soup from scratch, set up a 6-station in the living room with the good TV, endless DVD options, and whatever snacks Melody wanted. She'd check Melody's temperature every hour. Call the doctor's office, repeatedly administer medicine with such tenderness it made me ache to watch. When Melody had the flu in 6th grade, Mom stayed home for 4 days straight, sleeping on the couch to be near her, reading her favorite books aloud, basically creating a luxury illness experience. When I got sick, it was a completely different story. I remember the first time I got seriously ill after Melody's flu incident. I was 11, and I came down with something that made my whole body hurt, gave me a fever that spiked to 103, and left me so weak I could barely walk to the bathroom. I called for Mom from my bed, my voice hoarse. She came to the door but didn't come in. "What's wrong?" "I'm really sick, Mom. I think I need to see a doctor." She felt my forehead, briefly frowned, and said, "You probably just have what's been going around school. There's medicine in the bathroom cabinet. Take some and get some rest. You're strong, you'll fight it off." Then she left. I stayed in bed for 3 days. Mom looked in on me occasionally, usually just opening the door to ask if I was still alive, basically. Dad brought me water and crackers once, but that was it. No soup, no temperature checks, no doctor visit, no sympathy. On the 3rd day, when my fever finally broke and I dragged myself downstairs weak and shaky, Mom actually seemed annoyed. "Oh, good, you're better. I was wondering when you'd get up. You missed 3 days of school. That's a lot to make up." No asking how I felt. No relief that I'd recovered. Just concern about my schoolwork. That's when I understood that sickness, like everything else, was another arena where Melody's needs mattered and mine didn't. Middle school brought new dimensions to the favoritism. Melody discovered extracurricular activities, and Mom discovered living vicariously through her. First came dance classes, ballet, tap, jazz, contemporary. 4 classes a week at an expensive studio across town. Mom drove her to every single class, stayed to watch through the window, attended every recital with flowers and enthusiastic applause. Melody was mediocre at best, but Mom treated her like a prodigy. She filled Facebook with photos and videos, captions gushing about her talented daughter. She bought Melody expensive dance outfits, special shoes, enrolled her in extra workshops. The total cost must have been thousands of dollars a year. I loved music. I'd taught myself to play piano using free YouTube videos and the old keyboard in the church basement where I'd sometimes sneak in during community events. I was actually good at it, good enough that my music teacher at school pulled me aside one day and said I had real talent that I should take proper lessons. I went home excited, nervous, hopeful. Mom was in the kitchen making Melody a post-dance class smoothie. Mom, Mrs. Peterson, says I should take piano lessons. She thinks I could be really good. Mom didn't even turn around. Piano lessons are expensive, Camila, and were already stretched thin with Melody's activities. She paused, then added like it was an afterthought. Besides, you're naturally talented. You don't need formal training. You'll figure it out on your own. You always do. There it was again, that phrase that would haunt me through my childhood. You'll figure it out. You'll be fine. You don't need help. It wasn't a compliment. It was an excuse. It was their way of saying I wasn't worth the investment. I never brought it up again. Instead, I kept practicing on that church keyboard whenever I could sneak in teaching myself from library books and free online resources. I got good too, good enough to play at the church's Christmas service in 8th grade. I invited my family. Melody had a dance recital the same night, of course she did, and of course the whole family went to that instead. I played for a church full of strangers, and I played beautifully, and nobody from my family was there to hear it. The church organist told me I was one of the best young pianists she'd heard in 20 years. I went home and told my parents, hoping for some recognition. Dad nodded absently. Mom said, "That's nice, dear," and immediately turned back to discussing Melody's recital costume. Then there was the incident with the school counselor. I was in 8th grade, struggling with what I now recognize as depression, but at the time just felt like drowning. My grades were still perfect because school was the one place I could succeed, the one place my efforts were recognized. But I was withdrawing socially, eating lunch alone, not participating in class discussions even when I knew the answers. My English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed. She was one of those teachers who actually saw students as individuals who paid attention to the quiet ones. She asked me to stay after class one day. "Camilla, are you okay? You seem different lately." "I'm fine," I lied automatically. She didn't believe me. I've taught long enough to know when a student is just quiet and when a student is struggling. "Which one are you?" Something about her kindness broke through my defenses. I started crying right there in her classroom, and once I started, I couldn't stop. I told her everything. The favoritism, the loneliness, the feeling that I didn't matter in my own family. She listened without judgment, then asked if she could refer me to the school counselor. I panicked. "Well, they call my parents only if we think you're in danger, but a counselor might really help you, Camila. You shouldn't have to carry this alone." I agreed, desperate for someone to care. I saw Mrs. Chin, the school counselor, twice a week for 2 months. She was kind and professional and genuinely concerned. She taught me coping mechanisms, validated my feelings, helped me understand that my family's treatment wasn't my fault. She also thought my parents should be involved, that family counseling might help. I was terrified, but she convinced me it could make things better. So she called my parents and asked them to come in for a meeting. That's when everything got worse. Mom and Dad came to the meeting, both of them annoyed at having to take time off work. Mrs. Chin, in her professional and compassionate way, explained that I was showing signs of emotional neglect, that there seemed to be significant favoritism in the family dynamic, and that I would benefit from more parental attention and support. She was careful, diplomatic, non-accusatory. My parents reacted like she'd accused them of abuse. Mom's face went red. She launched into a defensive speech about how they loved both their daughters equally, how they were doing their best, how they resented the implication that they were bad parents. Dad sat silent and uncomfortable, occasionally nodding along with Mom's points. Mrs. Chin tried to de-escalate. "I'm not saying you're bad parents. I'm saying Camilla needs more support, and there seems to be an imbalance in how attention and resources are distributed between your daughters." Mom cut her off. "Melody needs more attention because she's more social, more involved in activities. Camilla is independent. She doesn't need us hovering over her all the time. Some children need more than others. That's just reality." Mrs. Chin glanced at me, sympathy in her eyes, then tried one more time. "But Camilla needs you too, even if she doesn't demand it. Children shouldn't have to compete for their parents' love and attention." The meeting ended badly. Mom was furious, Dad was uncomfortable, and I was humiliated. On the car ride home, Mom lectured me about airing family business to strangers, about being dramatic, about making them look like monsters when they were just doing their best. That counselor doesn't understand our family. She doesn't know how hard we work, how much we sacrifice. You're going to stop seeing her. This is ridiculous. And just like that, my one source of support was taken away. I stopped seeing Mrs. Chin, not because I wanted to, but because my parents pulled me out. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at me with such sadness the next time I had her class, but there was nothing she could do. I went back to handling everything alone, except now the walls around my heart were even thicker. High school was when the financial disparity became impossible to ignore. Freshman year, Melody decided she wanted to join the competitive cheerleading squad. This wasn't regular school cheerleading. This was elite travel team national competition cheerleading. The costs were astronomical. Uniform travel expenses, competition fees, coaching costs. We're talking thousands upon thousands of dollars a year. Dad sat at the kitchen table with the paperwork looking stressed. Eleanor, this is a lot of money. Can we really afford this? Mom didn't hesitate. Melody wants to do this and she deserves the opportunity. We'll make it work. And they did. Dad picked up extra hours. Mom cut back on groceries, started buying generic brands for everything. But Melody got her cheerleading. She got the uniform with her name embroidered in sparkly letters. She got the travel bag with matching bows. She got weekend trips to competitions in other states' hotel rooms, team dinners. Mom went to every single competition, sometimes taking Friday off work to drive Melody there early. Meanwhile, I was taking the bus to school because we suddenly couldn't afford gas for me to get rides. I was wearing the same 3 outfits on rotation because new clothes weren't in the budget. When my only pair of winter boots wore through, Mom told me to stuff cardboard in them to cover the holes because we couldn't afford new ones right now. But Melody got new cheer shoes every 6 months because the old ones lost their grip. The inequality was so stark it would have been funny if it wasn't destroying me from the inside out. I started having fantasies about confronting them, about screaming, about the unfairness, about making them see me. But I never did. I was too afraid that they'd confirm what I already suspected, that they simply loved Melody more, that they'd chosen her over me, that I was the expendable daughter. Sophomore year. Something happened that changed me fundamentally. My grandparents, my mom's parents, passed away within 6 months of each other. Grandpa died of a heart attack in March. Grandma of a stroke in August. I was devastated. They'd been the only family members who treated me and Melody equally, who called me just to chat, who remembered my interests and asked about my day. Grandpa used to sneak me $20 bills and tell me to buy something just for myself. Grandma taught me to bake and told me I was just as special as my sister. When they died, I lost my only advocates, my only proof that I was lovable. At their funerals, I cried harder than anyone. Mom seemed almost surprised by my grief. I didn't realize you were that close to them. They lived 20 minutes away, and I'd visited them every week for years, but Mom hadn't noticed. After Grandma's funeral, the family gathered at my aunt's house to discuss the estate. My grandparents weren't wealthy, but they had savings, some investments, a modest inheritance to distribute. The will was read, and I learned something that would fuel my rage for years to come. My grandparents had set up education funds for both Melody and me, equal amounts, about $30,000 each. It wasn't enough for 4 years of college, but it was a significant help, a gift from beyond the grave. The funds were set up so that my parents controlled them until we turned 18 or enrolled in college, whichever came first. I remember feeling such gratitude, such relief. Maybe I could go to college after all. Maybe I wouldn't graduate with crushing debt. But when I tried to talk to Dad about it later, about planning for college and how to use the fund wisely, he got uncomfortable and evasive. "We'll talk about it when the time comes, Camilla. Don't worry about it now." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. Over the next few months, I tried several times to bring it up, to get information about the account, to see statements. They shut me down every time. Then junior year, Mom let something slip during an argument about Melody's cheerleading expenses. She was complaining about how expensive everything was, and I said, "Maybe Melody could do one less expensive activity." Mom snapped back. "We're already using your grandmother's money to cover costs. We're managing." My blood ran cold. Using which grandmother's money? The money Grandma left for my education. Mom realized her mistake immediately. Her face went pale. "That's not what I meant, but it was too late." I demanded to see the account statements. After weeks of pressure, Dad finally reluctantly showed me. The account that should have had $30,000 had less than $8,000. They'd been dipping into it for 3 years. For Melody's cheerleading, for the house renovation, for a family vacation I hadn't even been invited on because I'd had to work. They'd stolen my future, the one gift my grandparents had left me, and they'd spent it on my sister. I lost it. Completely lost it. I screamed at them for the first time in my life. I called them thieves. I told them they'd stolen from a dead woman who'd trusted them. Mom cried and said they'd planned to pay it back. Dad said they'd had no choice, that they'd been in financial trouble and needed to borrow from somewhere. But Melody's fund was still intact, all $30,000. They'd only stolen from mine, because mine didn't matter, because I would figure it out, because I always did. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until I threw up. Then I stopped crying. Something inside me hardened into diamond. They'd taken my money. Fine. I'd take everything else. Senior year, I became obsessed with college applications. Not just getting in, but getting in with enough scholarship money that I wouldn't need them at all. I applied to 50 schools. 50! I spent every spare moment writing essays, perfecting applications, researching scholarships. My teachers were worried about me. "Camila, this is too much stress. You've already gotten into good schools." Mrs. Rodriguez, one of the few teachers who knew my situation, said gently. But I couldn't stop. This was my escape route. This was how I'd prove that I didn't need them, that I could succeed, despite them, that they'd made a terrible mistake in choosing Melody over me. I got into 43 schools. I received partial scholarships from 30 of them, but partial wasn't enough. I needed full rides. I needed to owe them nothing. Meanwhile, Melody was having a different senior year experience. She got into a decent state school with no scholarship because her grades were average, and her cheerleading, while expensive, hadn't resulted in any notable achievements. But it didn't matter because Mom and Dad were paying for everything. They'd already started shopping for dorm decorations. They'd opened a separate checking account for Melody's college expenses. They talked constantly about move-in day, about parents' weekend, about how exciting college would be. When I tried to talk about my college plans, they listened with half attention and changed the subject back to Melody. It was like I was a ghost, invisible, except when they needed something from me. Prom season arrived, and it was another stark illustration of how different our lives were. Melody got a dress shopping trip with Mom, a full-day event, with lunch at a nice restaurant and unlimited budget for the perfect dress. They came home with a gorgeous lavender gown that cost $400 plus shoes, jewelry, and a professional hair and makeup appointment booked for prom night. I wasn't planning to go to prom. I was working double shifts to save money for college. But some of my friends, the few I had convinced me I deserved one normal high school experience. I saved for 2 months and bought a dress from a thrift store for $25. It was pretty in a quiet way, and I was proud that I'd paid for it myself. When I showed Mom, she barely glanced up from her phone. "That's nice, honey." When I asked if she wanted to take pictures of me before prom like she'd done for Melody, she said she was tired and maybe Dad could do it. Dad took 3 quick photos on his phone and went back to watching TV. The night of prom, I did my own hair and makeup. I took the bus to the venue because no one offered to drive me. I had a decent time dancing with friends, taking silly photos. But when I got home around midnight, exhausted and happy, in spite of everything, the house was dark except for the living room where I could hear voices. I walked in to find Mom, Dad, and Melody looking through Melody's prom photos on the big TV, a slideshow of professional shots and candids, everyone laughing and reminiscing like it was the event of the century. No one had waited up for me. No one asked how my prom was. No one even noticed I was there until I said goodnight and headed upstairs. Melody called after me. "Oh, hey, Lissa. How was your prom?" "It was fine," I said. She went back to her photos. That was it. Graduation brought everything to a head in a way I wasn't prepared for. We were twins, so we were graduating together, walking in the same ceremony. But you'd never know we were family from how differently we were treated. In the weeks leading up to graduation, our house became a shrine to Melody's achievement. Balloons, banners, a huge photo collage of Melody through the years. Mom planned an enormous graduation party, invited everyone we'd ever met, ordered catering and a cake with Melody's face on it. When I asked if the party was for both of us, Mom said, "Of course it is, honey, but the decorations and planning made it clear who the real star was." My name was mentioned as an afterthought on the invitations, celebrating Melody Thorne's graduation and also Camila's. The ceremony itself was painful. We both gave speeches as valedictorian and salutatorian. I was valedictorian with a perfect GPA. Melody was salutatorian barely with a GPA that benefited from easier classes and generous grading from teachers who loved her personality. When they called my name and I walked across that stage to give my speech, I looked out into the crowd and saw my parents. Dad was checking his phone. Mom was turned sideways in her seat, talking to another parent. Neither was watching me. When Melody gave her speech, they stood up, recorded the whole thing on multiple devices, and Mom was crying proud tears. The message was clear. Melody's achievements mattered. Mine were expected, and therefore unremarkable. I delivered my speech about resilience and self-determination to a family that wasn't even listening, and I felt something inside me break free. Not in a bad way, in a liberating way. I stopped needing their approval in that moment. I stopped wanting their love. I started wanting revenge. The graduation party was exactly what I expected. A celebration of Melody with me as a side note. The cake had only Melody's name on it in large frosting letters. My name was scribbled on the side in smaller text. All the family friends congratulated Melody, asked about her college plans, told her how proud her parents must be. When they acknowledged me at all, it was usually to say something like, "I'm sure you'll do well too," or "You're the quiet one, right?" Dad gave a toast about Melody, about how proud he was of the woman she'd become, about how excited he was to see her flourish in college. He mentioned me in one sentence at the end, and of course, we're proud of Camilla too. She's very smart. That was it. My whole childhood, my perfect grades, my countless hours of work and sacrifice reduced to 3 words. She's very smart. The final unforgivable moment came 2 weeks after graduation. I'd been accepted to a good university with a partial scholarship that covered 60% of tuition. I still needed to cover room board books and the remaining 40% of tuition. I'd saved about $4,000 from working. I needed another $15,000 per year to make it work. I'd applied for every scholarship I could find, but results were still coming in. I needed to know if my parents would contribute anything. Just anything. Even $1,000 would help. I asked them to sit down with me to discuss college finances. They agreed somewhat reluctantly. Melody was there too because they were discussing her college finances at the same time. We sat around the kitchen table. Dad had papers and a calculator. Mom had her checkbook. They went through Melody's costs first. Tuition, housing, meal plan, books, spending money, everything. The total came to about $30,000 per year. "We'll cover all of it," Mom said definitively. "Your grandmother's fund plus our savings and current income should handle it. Melody won't need to work or take out loans. She can focus on her studies and social life." Melody beamed. "Thanks, Mom and Dad. You're the best." Then they turned to me. "So, Camilla, you have a partial scholarship, right?" Dad said. "Yes," I replied, my heart already sinking. "It covers about 60% of tuition. I need help with the rest." "How much?" He was already looking uncomfortable. "About $15,000 a year." The room went silent. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. Finally, Mom spoke. "Camilla, honey, we just don't have that much to spread between both of you. We've already committed to Melody's expenses. You're going to have to take out student loans for the difference." I felt like I'd been slapped. "But what about my grandmother's fund?" The one you stole from Dad flinched at the word. "We explained that we borrowed from it and we'll pay it back. But right now, we don't have $15,000 extra per year. You're smart and capable. You'll qualify for good loans. You'll pay them off eventually. But that's $60,000 in debt," I said, my voice shaking. "Melody won't have any. You're paying for everything for her." "How is that fair?" Mom's expression hardened. "Melody needs our full support. She's not as academically inclined as you. She won't get scholarships. She needs us to give her this foundation. You, on the other hand, are resourceful. You've always figured things out. You'll be fine with loans. You'll get a good job and pay them off. Some children need more help than others, Camilla. That's just reality." There it was, the thesis statement of my entire childhood. Some children need more help than others. Melody needs us. You don't. You'll be fine. You always are. I looked at my father silently, begging him to stand up for me to point out the injustice. He looked away cowardly as always. I looked at Melody, wondering if she'd say something if she'd offer to take out even a small loan to make things more equal. She said nothing, just played with her phone. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Fine," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I'll take out loans. I'll figure it out. Like I always do, because apparently being capable is a punishment in this family." I walked out of the kitchen, went upstairs, and packed a bag. I'd been secretly lining up a place to stay with Emma's family for the summer. They'd offered me their guest room when they learned my situation. I was leaving a month early, but I couldn't stay another night in that house. Mom called after me as I headed for the door with my bag. "Camilla, where are you going? Don't be dramatic." I turned back, and for the first time, she seemed to actually see the rage in my eyes. "I'm leaving. I'll stay with Emma's family until college starts. I can't be here anymore. You've made it abundantly clear that I don't matter in this family, that everything goes to Melody, and I get scraps. So I'm removing myself from the equation. You won't have to worry about me anymore." Dad stood up, looking panicked. "Now, Camilla, let's not be hasty. We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I said coldly. "You made your choice. I'm making mine." And then I left. I walked out of that house with one bag of clothes and $4,000 in savings, and I didn't look back. Not once. Emma's parents were wonderful. They asked if I was okay, offered support without judgment, gave me space and kindness. I spent that summer working 3 jobs, saving every penny applying for more scholarships. I barely slept. I lived on caffeine and determination. My phone rang constantly at first. Mom calling, Dad calling, even Melody sending confused texts. "Why did you leave? You're being so dramatic. This is so unfair to Mom and Dad." I didn't answer. I didn't owe them explanations. I didn't owe them anything. 2 weeks before I left for college, I received an email that changed everything. It was from Professor Sterling, a renowned economist at my university, who I'd corresponded with during the application process. He'd been impressed by my application essays and had asked to meet with me during freshman orientation. But this email said something different. "Miss Thorne, I've been reviewing your application materials again, and I'm very impressed by your research interests and work ethic. I'd like to offer you a position as my undergraduate research assistant starting your freshman year. It's unusual to hire freshmen, but I believe you're exceptional. The position pays $15 an hour, approximately 20 hours a week during the semester. Please let me know if you're interested." I read it 3 times, my hands shaking. $300 a week, $1,200 a month, enough to significantly reduce my loan burden. This was my lifeline. I accepted immediately. College started, and I threw myself into it with frightening intensity. I took the maximum course load, worked 20 hours a week for Professor Sterling, and picked up another job at the library for an additional 15 hours. I was working more than full-time while being a full-time student. My schedule was brutal. Up at 5 in the morning to study before my 6 a.m. library shift. Classes from 9 to 3. Research work for Professor Sterling from 3 to 8. Back to my dorm to study until midnight. Sleep for 5 hours. Repeat. I lived on coffee and granola bars and sheer determination. My roommate, a sweet girl named Jessica from a loving family, was worried about me. "Alyssa, you're going to burn out. You need to sleep more, eat real food, have fun sometimes." But I couldn't. Every moment I wasn't working or studying felt like wasted time. I was racing against debt, against doubt, against the voices in my head that said my parents were right, that I didn't deserve help, that I was only worth what I could produce. Meanwhile, Melody's social media was a highlight reel of college fun. Sorority rush, frat parties, football games, shopping trips, brunch with friends. Mom commented on every post. So proud of my college girl. Dad liked everything. They visited her twice in the first semester alone, took her out to expensive restaurants, bought her new furniture for her dorm. They never visited me. Not once. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I was better off without them. But it hurt. It hurt every single day. The real turning point came in October of my freshman year. Professor Sterling had asked me to attend a departmental meeting where graduate students presented their research. I sat in the back, taking notes, absorbing everything. After the presentations, there was a mixer with wine and cheese. I didn't usually attend social events too exhausted and feeling out of place, but Professor Sterling had specifically asked me to come. He introduced me to several faculty members, describing my work in glowing terms. One professor, Dr. Hammond, seemed particularly interested. "You're a freshman?" he asked, surprised. "And Sterling has you working on his financial inequality research." I nodded. "That's impressive. He usually doesn't take undergraduates, especially not first years. You must be exceptional." Exceptional. I'd been called that before, but it always felt conditional. Exceptional enough to succeed on your own. Exceptional enough that you don't need help. But Dr. Hammond meant it as genuine praise with no subtext. He asked about my interests, my background, my goals. I found myself opening up, talking about my experience with family financial dynamics, how it had shaped my interest in economic research. He listened intently. Then he said something that changed my trajectory. "You should apply for the Benjamin Ford Scholarship. It's extremely competitive, usually goes to seniors or graduate students, but they've occasionally selected juniors. With your story and your academic record, you might have a shot. Start building your application now." That was the first time I'd heard of the scholarship that would eventually become my weapon. That night, I researched everything about the Benjamin Ford Scholarship. It was incredibly prestigious, awarded to only one student every 2 years. Full graduate school funding, $50,000 stipend, guaranteed job placement. But more than that, it came with publicity. The winner was profiled in major publications, invited to speak at events, essentially launched into academic stardom. The selection criteria focused on academic excellence, groundbreaking research, and overcoming significant adversity. The ceremony was a huge public event, broadcast locally, attended by donors and press. As I read about it, a plan started forming in my mind. This wasn't just a scholarship. This was a platform. This was how I could tell my story publicly and undeniably in a way that would force my family to confront what they'd done. But I was only a freshman. I had 3 years to build a case so compelling that the selection committee couldn't ignore me. So I got to work. I started documenting everything. I kept meticulous records of my work hours, my expenses, my loans. I saved every email, every text, every piece of evidence of my family's treatment. I threw myself into research with Professor Sterling, producing work that was genuinely groundbreaking. My focus was on family economic dynamics and how parental resource allocation affected children's outcomes. It wasn't hard to find passion for the topic. I was living it. That's also when I met Daniel Hayes. It was November late at night in the library. I was the only person on the 4th floor or so, I thought, working on a paper about financial trauma. I was so absorbed I didn't hear him approach until he spoke. "You've been here every night this week. Are you okay?" I looked up, startled. He was tall, dark-haired, with concerned brown eyes and a law textbook under his arm. "I'm fine," I said automatically. He didn't believe me. Nobody who's fine spends 12 hours a day in the library and looks like they haven't slept in a month. He gestured to the chair across from me. "Mind if I sit? I'm Daniel. I'm Alyssa," I replied, too tired to be unfriendly. He sat down and pulled out his own work, and for a while we studied in companionable silence. This became our routine. Late nights in the library, sometimes studying in silence, sometimes talking during coffee breaks. Daniel was a law student, 2nd year, specializing in family law. He was brilliant and kind, with a sharp sense of justice that matched my own. Over weeks and then months, we became friends. Real friends. He was the first person at college I let see beyond my walls. One night, after a particularly brutal week where I'd worked 60 hours between my 2 jobs while keeping up with coursework, I broke down crying in the library. Daniel found me in a study room, sobbing into my hands. He didn't ask questions, just sat with me until I could speak. Then I told him everything. About Melody, about my parents, about the stolen fund, about the crushing unfairness of my entire life. He listened with growing anger, not at me, but for me. "That's abuse," he said when I finished. "Financial abuse, emotional neglect. What they did, taking your grandmother's money, that might actually be illegal depending on how the fund was set up. I was so used to minimizing my experience that hearing him call it abuse was shocking. "You don't think I'm just being dramatic?" I asked, my voice small. "Alyssa," he said seriously, "dramatic is complaining that your parents won't buy you a car. What you're describing is systematic favoritism and neglect. You were a child. They were supposed to take care of you. They failed." Hearing him validate my pain was like a dam breaking. I cried harder, and he just sat there steady and supportive until I was all cried out. After that night, Daniel became my co-conspirator. He was fascinated by my plan to win the Benjamin Ford Scholarship as a form of public reckoning. "That's brilliant," he said. "You're not just succeeding despite them, you're creating a platform to expose them. Do you know how powerful that is?" We started working on my application strategy immediately. He helped me frame my story in a way that was honest but compelling. He coached me on how to discuss my adversity without sounding bitter. He helped me document everything, building a case as solid as any legal argument. He also did some digging into my family's finances, curious about what else they might be hiding. What he found infuriated both of us. Through public records and some creative research, Daniel discovered that my parents weren't actually struggling financially like they claimed. Dad had gotten a significant promotion 2 years ago. Mom had inherited money from her aunt. They'd renovated the house for $80,000. They'd taken a cruise. They had healthy investment accounts. They weren't poor. They weren't stretched thin. They were choosing to spend their money on Melody and themselves while claiming they couldn't afford to help me. It was deliberate, calculated exclusion disguised as financial necessity. The betrayal cut even deeper, knowing it was a choice, not a circumstance. Daniel suggested we could potentially take legal action. "If we can prove they misappropriated your grandmother's trust fund, you might have a case." But I didn't want a legal battle. I didn't want their money anymore. I wanted something better than money. I wanted them to face public shame. I wanted their friends, their community, their social circle to know exactly what kind of people they were. The Benjamin Ford Scholarship would do that far more effectively than any lawsuit. So we focused all our energy on making me the perfect candidate. Sophomore year, I added another dimension to my application. I started volunteering with a nonprofit that helped first-generation college students navigate financial aid. I tutored students from low-income backgrounds. I wrote articles for the school newspaper about economic inequality in education. I presented research at undergraduate conferences. I built a resume that was undeniable. Professor Sterling was instrumental in all of this. He pushed me to apply for research grants to submit papers to academic journals to think bigger about my work. He wrote me recommendations that were apparently legendary in their praise. By the end of sophomore year, I had 2 published papers, had won several research awards, and was being talked about in the department as a rising star. Everything was building toward the moment when I would apply for that scholarship. Junior year brought new challenges. The workload intensified. I was taking graduate-level courses now, working 35 hours a week between my 2 jobs, volunteering, conducting research. I was exhausted down to my bones. There were days I wanted to quit, to just be a normal college student who had time to sleep and socialize and breathe, but I couldn't. Every time I felt myself weakening, I thought about that kitchen table conversation about my mother saying I didn't need help about watching my sister get everything while I got nothing. The anger fueled me when nothing else could. Daniel worried about me. "You're burning yourself out. This revenge isn't worth your health." But it was never just about revenge. It was about proving something to myself, about becoming so undeniably successful that they could never say I wasn't worth investing in. Then came the opportunity that would seal everything. Professor Sterling called me into his office one April afternoon near the end of junior year. "Alyssa, I want to nominate you for the Benjamin Ford Scholarship. I know you're not a senior yet, but your work is already at a graduate level. Your story is compelling. I think you have a real shot at this." I'd been waiting for this moment for 2 years, building toward it, but hearing him say it still made my heart race. "Yes," I said immediately. "I want to apply." He smiled, that rare smile he reserved for achievements he genuinely respected. "Good, because you deserve this. And because your research deserves a bigger platform. Let's make sure your application is perfect." We spent the next 3 months crafting my application. Every essay was polished until it shone. Every recommendation was strategic. My research sample was my best work, a paper analyzing the long-term psychological and economic effects of parental favoritism that was basically a case study of my own life, carefully anonymized and backed by extensive data. The personal statement was the hardest part. I had to tell my story in a way that was honest and compelling without sounding bitter or self-pitying. Daniel and I went through 50 drafts. Tell them about the bike, he said, about the graduation party, about your grandmother's money, but frame it around resilience, around what you learned, around how it shaped your research interests. I wrote and rewrote and rewrote. Again, the final version was a careful balance of vulnerability and strength, pain and triumph. I described working 2 jobs, living in a basement room, teaching myself piano, achieving perfect grades despite working 40 hours a week. I talked about watching my twin sister receive every advantage while I received none, and how that inequality fueled my passion for researching family economic dynamics. I ended with a paragraph about self-reliance. The greatest gift my family gave me was the belief that I didn't need them. It forced me to discover my own strength, to build my own foundation, to achieve success that belongs entirely to me. I wouldn't wish my experience on anyone, but I also wouldn't trade the person it made me become. I submitted the application in May. The waiting was torture. They wouldn't announce finalists until August, winners until October. I spent the summer working full-time, saving money, trying not to obsess over the outcome. But I couldn't help it. This scholarship had become the culmination of everything I'd been working toward. It was validation. It was vindication. It was my platform to tell the truth. When the email came in August saying I was a finalist, I was in the middle of a library shift. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking, then called Daniel. "I'm a finalist," I whispered, unable to believe it. His shout of joy was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I knew it. I knew they'd see how incredible you are. "We're going to destroy them, Alyssa. We're going to make them face what they did." For the first time in years, I smiled with pure, uncomplicated happiness. Being a finalist meant I had to do a final interview with the selection committee in September. This was it. This was my chance to tell my story to people who would actually listen, who would recognize its significance. Professor Sterling and Daniel helped me prepare. We anticipated every question. We practiced my answers until they were perfect, compelling, but not rehearsed. I walked into that interview room in a suit I'd bought with my own money, carrying a portfolio of my research, and I owned every second of it. The committee was 5 people, 3 academics, a corporate donor, and a journalist who covered education issues. They asked about my research, about my methods, about my findings. I answered with confidence, citing sources, explaining implications. Then came the personal questions. "Ms. Thorne, your application mentions significant family challenges. Can you elaborate on how those experiences shaped your academic interests?" The lead panelist, Dr. Morrison, a distinguished economist, asked this gently. I took a breath and launched into my story. I told them about growing up in a family where resources were distributed unequally, where one daughter received full financial and emotional support while the other received nothing. I described working throughout high school and college to support myself while my twin sister's education was fully funded by our parents. I talked about discovering my grandparents had left me money that my parents had appropriated. I explained how these experiences led me to research family economic dynamics, how personal pain had transformed into academic passion. I was careful, strategic. I didn't sound angry. I sounded resilient, thoughtful, like someone who had transformed trauma into purpose. The committee was riveted. One woman's eyes were actually wet with tears. Dr. Morrison asked the question I'd been waiting for. "If you win this scholarship, Ms. Thorne, what would you say to your family?" I looked him straight in the eye and delivered the line. Daniel and I had practiced 100 times. I'd thank them for teaching me that the only person I can truly depend on is myself. That self-reliance is a gift even when it doesn't feel like one in the moment. That being underestimated is the best motivation for exceeding every expectation. I'd thank them for showing me exactly who I don't want to be. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Dr. Morrison smiled. "That's a very mature perspective, Ms. Thorne. Thank you for sharing your story with us." I left the interview knowing I'd done everything I could. Now I just had to wait. The acceptance letter came on a Tuesday in early October. I was in my dorm room studying for midterms when the email arrived. Dear Ms. Thorne, we are thrilled to inform you that you have been selected as this year's recipient of the Benjamin Ford Scholarship. I stopped reading. I couldn't breathe. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. I called Daniel first, my voice shaking. I won. Oh my God, Daniel, I won! He whooped so loud my roommate looked over in alarm. This is it, Alyssa. This is your moment. The ceremony is in 3 weeks. You need to invite your family. You need to watch them face what they did in front of everyone they know. Revenge served cold, he said with satisfaction. No, I corrected. Justice served publicly. There's a difference. I deliberated for days about whether to invite them. Part of me wanted them there. Wanted them to see my triumph, wanted them to feel the shame they deserved. Part of me didn't want to give them the satisfaction of being present for my moment. Daniel convinced me. They need to be there. This doesn't work if they're not there. The whole point is public acknowledgement of what they did. You need witnesses. So I made the call. Mom answered on the 3rd ring, surprised to hear from me. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Camilla, honey, how are you? It's been so long. I bristled at the casual tone like she hadn't essentially abandoned me. I'm fine. I'm calling because I have an event at school in a few weeks, an awards ceremony. I thought you might want to come. Of course. What's it for? Just academic achievement, I said vaguely. Nothing major. October 28th at 7 p.m. I'll email you the details. She agreed enthusiastically, probably thinking it was a minor departmental award, something she could attend to assuage her guilt without much effort. Perfect. She had no idea what was coming. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation and anticipation. The university's PR department wanted to do a feature on me. The local news wanted an interview. The ceremony itself was being planned as a major event with hundreds of attendees live streaming the works. I met with the MC who would be introducing me, helped him craft the introduction to include the most important details of my story. I wanted every word to count. Daniel helped me pick out a dress something elegant and powerful, deep emerald green that made me look like I belonged on that stage. Professor Sterling gave me advice on my acceptance speech. Make it about more than you. Make it about everyone who's ever been overlooked. Give them something to remember. I wrote and rewrote that speech until every word was exactly right. The day of the ceremony, I arrived hours early. The auditorium was massive, ornate, with a stage that seemed designed for momentous occasions. I watched the tech crew set up lights and cameras. The PR team briefed me on timing and logistics. Daniel met me backstage. You ready for this? He asked. I've been ready for 4 years, I replied. We hugged, and I felt the weight of everything we'd been building toward. This is going to change your life, he said. It already has, I told him. This is just making it official. I peeked through the curtain and watched people start to arrive. Faculty donors press students. And then I saw them. My family walking in together. Mom in a nice dress, Dad in a suit, Melody in something designer. They looked around the auditorium, taking in the size and formality, starting to realize this was bigger than they'd expected. They found their seats in the 7th row. Perfect positioning, close enough to see everything, far enough back that they couldn't leave without it being obvious. They were trapped. The ceremony began. University administrators gave speeches about the importance of the scholarship, about Benjamin Ford's legacy, about the institution's commitment to supporting exceptional students. Previous winners spoke about how the scholarship had changed their lives. The auditorium was full now, probably 400 people. The energy was building toward the main event. Me! Finally, the MC stepped to the microphone for the final introduction. And now for the Benjamin Ford Scholarship, our most prestigious award given to a student who exemplifies extraordinary academic excellence and the ability to succeed against significant obstacles. His voice carried through the speakers, commanding attention. This year's recipient is a junior who has already published research in top journals, maintained a perfect GPA while working 35 hours a week, and overcome family circumstances that would have broken most people. I watched my family's faces on the big screen that showed the audience. Mom's smile was starting to freeze. Dad looked confused. Melody was still on her phone, but was starting to pay attention. The MC continued. Ms. Thorne has worked 2 jobs throughout her entire college career to pay tuition, room, and board. Despite being a twin, despite her family having the means to support her, she has received no financial or emotional support from her parents, who chose to fully fund her sister's education while leaving her to figure it out alone. The camera was fully on my family now. Mom's face was going white. Dad looked like he might be sick. Melody's mouth had fallen open. She has done this entirely on her own, the MC said, his voice ringing with admiration. From a basement apartment to research publications, from working midnight shifts to achieving academic stardom. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome this year's Benjamin Ford Scholar, Alyssa Thorne. The applause was thunderous as I walked onto that stage. But I wasn't looking at the audience. I was looking at the screen showing my family's faces. Mom looked like she was trying not to cry. Dad had his head in his hands. Melody was staring at me with something that might have been horror or shock or shame. I took the plaque from Dr. Morrison, shook hands with the dean, and stepped up to the microphone. The applause faded. The auditorium was silent, waiting. This was my moment. I took a breath and began to speak. Thank you so much for this incredible honor. This scholarship represents more than financial support for my graduate education. It represents validation for everyone who has ever been told they weren't worth the investment, for everyone who's been overlooked in their own family, for everyone who's had to build their own foundation because the people who should have supported them chose not to. I paused, letting that sink in, watching my mother's face crumble on the screen. For years, I was told that I didn't need help, that I was capable enough to figure things out on my own, that my struggles didn't matter as much as someone else's comfort. I was made to feel invisible, unworthy of investment, not deserving of the same love and support that was freely given to others. My voice was steady, clear, carrying to every corner of the auditorium. But here's what I learned. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest gift you can receive. Because when no one expects anything from you, when no one believes in you, when no one thinks you're worth helping, you're free to prove them all catastrophically wrong without the weight of their expectations holding you back. I looked directly at where my family sat, though. With the stage lights, I couldn't see their faces anymore, just their shapes in the darkness. I want to thank everyone who supported me in my journey. Professor Sterling, who saw my potential when I was just an exhausted freshman. Daniel Hayes, who stood by me and helped me document every injustice. My friends Emma and Jessica, who gave me a place to stay and reasons to keep going. And yes, I need to acknowledge my family. They taught me perhaps the most valuable lesson of all, that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself, that sometimes the people who should love you most will be the ones who teach you how to love yourself instead, and that success built entirely by your own hands is infinitely sweeter than anything handed to you. I paused again, my voice dropping lower but somehow more powerful. My success is mine alone. I built it without help, without support, without the advantages my sister received. And that makes it unassailable. No one can ever take credit for what I've achieved because I achieved it despite them, not because of them. The applause started before I finished speaking, building to a standing ovation. People were crying. Cameras were flashing. I stood there taking it in this moment. I'd worked 4 years to create this public declaration of my worth. I'd won. Not just the scholarship, though, that was life-changing. I'd won the right to tell my truth, to make my family face their choices in front of everyone they knew. As I walked off the stage, reporters immediately swarmed me. Can we get an interview? What's next for you? How does it feel to overcome such adversity? I answered graciously, professionally, with just enough detail to keep the story alive. In my peripheral vision, I could see my family trying to reach me, but the crowd was too thick. Perfect. Let them wait. Let them feel what it's like to be ignored. So here I am, 26 years old, successful beyond my wildest dreams, living in a city I love, doing work that matters. My family is a distant memory, a chapter in my story that taught me valuable lessons but doesn't define my future. Maybe one day we'll reconcile in some limited capacity. Maybe Melody and I will find a way to be sisters again, though it will never be the same. Maybe my parents will truly understand what they lost, but maybe not, and I've made peace with that too. Because at the end of the day, the only person's approval I need is my own. The only person who needs to believe in me is me. And the only family I need is the one I choose, the friends and mentors and partners who see my value without having to be convinced. The ice flame they created in me didn't destroy me. It forged me into something unbreakable, and for that, ironically, I'm almost grateful. Have you ever had to choose between family and your own well-being? Have you ever been the overlooked one while someone else got all the attention and resources? If this story resonated with you, if you've walked a similar path, or know someone who has, let me know in the comments. Share your story, your strength, your survival, and if you found value in hearing mine, if it gave you hope or validation, or just the comfort of knowing you're not alone, hit that like button and subscribe, because we all deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be enough. And sometimes we have to be the ones who teach the world that lesson.